Hello, everyone. A very good evening to all. Today, we're going to talk about data anonymization, chapter 7. So, what is data anonymizations? It basically refers to the process of removing identifying informations on those data that we are analyzing, right? So that when we analyze certain big data, it will not give away certain individuals' particulars informations, right? That might be sensitive, right? So this is in view of our Personal Data Protection Act, right? Where we don't want to get caught, right? To be able to know some of this sensitive data, right? So this is just like when we are marking students' paper, right? When we mark students' exam scripts, students are not required to write their name on their answer script. Reason being, if the lecturer sees the student's name, right, and he knows that this student is a good student, he might be very lenient or might be obliged to give him a better grade, right? So there is this biasness that can be created if you happen to know a person data, right? So this is where we try to ensure the data that we manipulate or we analyze, it does not tell tale of a specific individuals. Okay, so we will be employing some of this technique called the data anonymization, right? Where it could be removing of certain personal name or personal informations from the whole data, so that we will not be able to know this data belong to who, right? So, but in doing so, sometimes we might affect the accuracies of the data, right? Or we might not be able to achieve the objective of doing the data analysis. Take for example, right? If we are doing a sales analysis, okay, where we have all the transaction record that contain the customer name, the age of birth, the gender, and maybe the product that they have purchased, right? So if we were to remove the name, the age, for example, right, from the record, because we don't want to know exactly who's the customer are buying some of these products, right? So that in a way will affect my market analysis of who are my customer segment, because I won't know who and which age group they belong to if you remove those data. So that's where we're coming from, where when you perform this kind of data anonymizations technique, right, you have to be careful what is your objective. So when you remove some of this, it might it might not be able to become very useful, right? Where the functionality of doing those market analysis, okay, will be reduced, right? As much as like I wouldn't know, like you say, I've removed the gender, for example, then I would know my customer segment, whether it's a male or females who are buying a particular products. Okay, so we have to be careful about stripping away too many of those identifier. Okay, and that might not make the data analysis pretty much useful, right? And it sometimes might also affect the accuracy of the data if you remove too many records, for example, right? Later on, you will also see that when we do this, employ this data anonymizations technique, we might also be masking out some data, or we might be altering some of this data, and that's where it would also affect the accuracies of the data, right? Why do we do some such technique? Because you will see later on, it's all about masking, not giving you the actual data, so that sometimes with the actual data, it might give away, right, certain identity of a person. Okay, again, we will see with some of these illustration later on. Right, so the first data anonymization technique is using the attributes suppression. When you see attributes, it usually refers to column, okay, the columns of the database or the spreadsheet. So Let's take a look at example of what does it mean. It's easier to see example. So this is an example of attribute suppression. Take for example, before anonymizations. Okay, this is students' test results. Okay, so you have the student's name, then you have the lecturers, right? The respective lecturers' name, right? Who teach them, and then you got the test results. So sometimes, very often, when we review the test result to the students, right, in order to protect the students, other students from knowing other students score, right, because maybe some student didn't do very well, right, it's very shameful to show that they didn't do very well or they failed the subject. Like for example, right, if you look at this right, these students score a low 45, fail, right? You won't want to, when you flash out to everyone, you won't want to shame her too much, right? So we basically, what we do in also data research and be able to do this to ensure that when we analyze, we will not know that the test score of the individuals students. We therefore do this, remove this column. Okay, this is where talk called attribute suppression. We basically remove. So this is after suppression, right? Removing the student name. So in what we have now for us to do the analysis of the student's grade, okay, will be we still have their individual score, just that we don't know who the students. But if that is not important, it's fine. We just want to know, let's say, the average score of the students or the overall trend. Just give me a minute on the power. Sorry. Right. Sorry about it. So So there you have, right? So we can go ahead and analyze this data if the individual students relationship is not important. So this analysis could be what we want to analyze which trainer do a better job, okay, in training the students, in cultivating students with better score. So this is good enough, right? If we don't really need the students individual name, right? So this will be a good enough for doing data analysis based on lectures value adding to the students. Okay, so this is removing. Okay, so yet we are able to protect, right? Using this method, we are able to protect the student's identity. So this is the first method. The second method is record suppression. While you can remove the column, you can also remove the rows as well. This is where we talk about record suppressions, removing of the entire data set. Okay, so but when you remove the data records, right, that might affect the average. Okay, this is where you talk about this medium, right? Imagine if I were to remove one of these, let's say the earlier, right? If I were to remove this record, right? What does it say? I can say that, hey, jolly well, the student did very well. Nobody failed the exam. Nobody failed the test, right? So you have just also affected the the profile of the test, right? And also the average, right? By removing the lowest grade. That will have a deep impact on the average score of the results. So so that is the concern if you were to remove. Okay. So why do you remove this? Okay, there's a few possible reasons, right? Because of some outliers, okay, and because some of these outliers can easily identify who's that person. Take for example this, right? Data set before anonymizations, right? Imagine these are the person's name, okay, and the height, the weight, and the age, and also the corresponding disease, whether they have or not. Let's say if I know, okay, a person's, okay, let's say this whole class. If I know this whole class, uh, Peter is the heaviest, right? It's the fattest of all. So even though if you try to remove this, right, I will still be able to identify who is this, right, by looking at the weight, right? So the weight will be able to identify who's the fattest person. Okay, so in a way, you know this is the outlier, right? Because he's happened to be the heaviest weight and because you don't want people to know and you can't remove this weight, so what you try to do is you try to remove this record so that the person to protect this particular record or this particular person's, right? Because if I know this is the fattest person, right, then if I review this, link it to this, I'll know, oh, Peter has disease A, right? And I won't want that to happen, right? So this is like outlier. So somebody that is extreme, or even like if I know the class who's the tallest, right? Even if you have removed this, right, I will still be able to guess who's that person is, right? So by looking at maybe, okay, in this case, the shortest, right? Even the shortest guy, I know is who, and I will be able to know that shortest guy has certain disease also, and he smoke also. So this is where we say that sometimes we want to remove, okay, a particular record because we know that this will lead to some ability to identify who the person is, and we want to take. But upon removing that, okay, that might have an impact on some of this data set that we are analyzing. Okay, I hope you are clear about this. Right, another technique that we employ, okay, in terms of data protection is also in order to uh, make the record unidentifiable, we mask out using asterisks. Okay, asterisk like this. Another example. So instead of reviewing every individual postal code, telling okay which block you stay, right? We basically mask out the block like this, right? You know the code. Usually the last three number is actually your block number. So we don't want people to be able to identify, okay, which block, okay, that there's some problem or we don't want to go into those details, right? So we try to mask it out, okay, using this. So instead, we still be able to tell from here which town, okay, which particular town he is in. But that maybe is okay, but not to the level of identifying be able to identify the block, okay. So we mask out. So this is a character masking example. So this is the third technique that we use to basically to remove some of this identifier so that we play with some of this data. We will not be influenced, okay, or being stereotyped by our own perceptions. Okay, so it will be fair when we do data analysis. Right, the fourth technique is basically using the pseudo-minimizations, right? So this is about replacing identifying data with some makeup value or some random number or some purposely generated number, right? Again, you might sound confused, but I tell you, if you look at the example, it's easier. It's like your admin number, right? This is pseudonymizations. Basically, instead of giving your full name, okay, I use the admin number, right? So this is also another way that sometimes when we present our quiz result or test result to the students, we don't use the name. We delete the whole columns of the name and we basically retain the admin number, student admin number. And by looking at this number, it's just a number to you. You won't be able to identify, okay, which person, right? And this is also good in the sense that you might be able to do reverse, right? If you have a table like this, right? Just like if the lecturer will have a table that have the student name and also the student admin number. then with that, they will be able still, if they want to trace back, they can have the options, okay, to trace back to the exact students or the persons, right? So this is using the admin number. Okay, so using admin number, at least it's not so direct in terms of infringing of Data Protection Act, because you're using some numbers, and that numbers, right, to most people they will not be able to uh, link it to the actual person, the actual identity, right? Unless they do the deliberate effort to, or they have this identifying table database to link back. So if you don't want people to know, then you store this particular mapping tables in a secure manner so that not anyone can have this set of data, right? So unless uh, people with authorities to know, then they can actually trace back. So this is a pseudonymizations. Okay, right. Another technique, okay, in terms of covering up is using generalizations, right? So this is also a deliberate efforts to basically change the actual data. Okay, it's like recoding, right? So converting a person details age into some range instead. So this, you do this when you don't necessarily need the actual details, actual name numbers, right? So example, age. This is the age, but you generalize them using age group, right? You generalize them using age group like this. So at least it will not give away the actual age of the person. Okay, so this is using generalizations. Swapping. Swapping is you will rearrange the data in the data set, right? So that at least for the attributes value is still quite intact. The column value is still quite intact, right? So this is if you think that the record level, uh, there's no need for analysis of relationship, right, between the attributes at record levels, right? So you can actually rearrange the record level of the columns. Okay, so you can swap some data along the columns. Okay, between the different records level. So what does it mean? Basically, it's about, let's say this is before anomalizations, right? You got such information, but what happened over here after anomalizations, right? You basically reshuffle these columns, okay? You reshuffle them, okay? So the lawyer supposed to be date of birth this 7th of March 1985, right? So it become the date of birth is swapped to the nurse. So you can see that actually internal swap of these records, right? So when people get hold of this, they will not be able to know the exact persons, right? So you can only do this is, okay, where the relationship between the records, okay, is not that important. But whereas when you rearrange the records, at least the data set, okay, within the attributes or column is still pretty much intact, right? Just like example, average number of visits, okay, will be this, right? So you take the average of this, and to take the average of this is still the same, okay? So there's no impact. So you simply uh, scramble the records. At least when people try to look at it, they will not be able to relate who uh, who is the actual person that was born on the 3rd of January 1970s. Right? So this is one technique which is using the swapping. At least you don't change the value, but you simply just swap the columns, swap the records in the columns. okay, and leaving the columns totality is pretty much intact. Okay. Another technique in data anomalizations is basically using data uh, perturbations, right? Perturbations. This is like you actually disturb the data, modify the data slightly. So again, let's take a look at example, which is easier. Example, right? So this is before anomalizations. So this is the actual data. But after anomalization, you vary slightly, okay, the records of the data, like 50, 51, or 49, okay, like 70 becomes 69. You alter the data slightly so that it doesn't reflect the actual data. So if someone who get a piece of this information, at least it's not that accurate, right? But not try to deviate too much, right? So otherwise it will not work. So this is one way, right, where you basically try to doctor the data and change the data by a bit so that it doesn't affect the overall analysis. So like I say, all this is done in view of Data Protection Act, not to be able to identify the data that we are analyzing to a particular person. Okay, so basically it's trying to hide the identity, okay, of a data, okay, that we are looking at. Syntactic data. Okay, so syntactic data is basically you try to generate from the original data and then you try to do a regression or try to do a prediction or you try to form the data, right, by certain algorithm, right, based on what you have learned in the past or in some historical data that you have, right? So this is usually done like, for example, when you want to do stock analysis, right? Very much we want to look at the historical data and want to do a projection of the price for tomorrow or the other days that will either go up or go down, right? So you do some projections of data. So example, okay, syntactic data. So this is the original set of data. We collect the data of people doing hot desking facility, people booking, okay, booking the time to reserve a table, right, or some meeting room, right. So you take note of all the appointments or the reservations, right. From there, you basically try to uh, rearrange and then put them into some starting time and end time, and then you allocate the number of users, right. So from there, then you basically try to, right, these are all from original data, okay, the real actual data. Then you try to formulate, okay, a new set of data based on, okay, the data that you have analyzed, okay. So try to basically create, okay, from the original data and then come up with some pretty much very close, okay, to the original data as much as possible, but replacing it with other names or other quite similar data, right? So this is what statistically can derive from the original data. Right. So I think we have come to more or less the last one. I think is the data aggregation technique. Okay. So where you try to aggregate a list of records, right, to a summarized value. So it's about summarizing, right? So the last technique that we're looking at is actually the data anonymization technique, where we, okay, try to summarize. So this is the before anonymizations, the original data, right? But sometimes we don't want to give so much data to away, right? So we kind of summarize it, okay, into a summarized table with some range. right? So this example is a charity organization. We have a records of all the donations made, and sometimes some of the donors, they don't want to be identified, right? They want to remain as anonymous donor. So the charity, what they can do is they can group all this data, okay, sufficiently enough for some external consultant to perform some data analysis, right? So basically they come up with a summary table, right? So that it's still good enough for people to analyze. So you can see this become a range of people, right, donating from between 1,000 to 1,900. How many donors will receive and what is the amount, etc. Okay, so this is the technique. Right. So in summary, we have seen a couple of data and normalization technique. One is of course using masking, right? We have seen it using X to mask out, right? Example NRIC, right? In order not to reveal too much of your full ID number, so you basically mask out the first few digits, right? Leaving only the last three digits. This is pretty much like what we always do in a lucky draw. We always announce the last four digit or the last four digit of a handful number, right? So in order not to give away too much of your ID number or your handphone number, so we use the masking technique. Another technique is called the pseudomyelizations. Okay, this is the technique where we try to replace with uh, some unique number, right? Example, very easy, your student admin number, right? Instead of giving away your using your full name, a person name, we use some admin number or unique number, okay, so that it's not easily identifiable. The other methods that we've seen in the last one is actually the aggregations. This is where we try to use the summary. Remember the last technique that we used, data aggregations. This is using summarized tables, right? So in order to review too much details about the individual donors that we have, right? So we basically summarize them into a summarized data set. Okay, the other techniques that we discussed is also the replacements. So we replace it with some average number or some close numbers. Okay, so instead of giving the exact details where maybe the exact numbers is not very the it's not very important. We just need to know roughly, right, which is good enough, right? As long as the deviation of the number doesn't deviate too much. So we try to, in a way, try to blur the actual information. This is done where precision, okay, is not a requirement. Where we just want to simply know the rough trend. Okay, the last technique we also seen is also using the data suppression, where here we look at the attribute suppression and also the record suppression, right? Where we remove the record or we remove the column so that it's not easily identifiable, right? So you will find that in our practical sessions, we'll be using the RapidMinder to perform some of these anomalizations. So that's where you have some hands-on practice on that. Okay, so with that, I would like to conclude my chapter on this. So thank you very much for your attention.